Hi, it's Krystle here with Clear Sky Professionals. I'm here with Dave, and we're going to talk about the 3 F's of a real estate transaction, how it can fail the most quickly here in Flagstaff. You've got fire, flood, and foundation.
Right. So these are the 3 quickest ways your transaction can fall apart that could be potentially out of everybody's control, but we're going to help everybody understand, what steps we can take to try to, troubleshoot up front, work through these issues, and, at least make sure our clients are protected in the sense that they're going to find out of any of these issues during their inspection period while, their earnest money is protected and while they're still able to do due diligence.
Yeah, perfect. So let's jump into the first one, fire.
Yep.
What does that mean to you?
Well, of course, we live in the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world, from what I understand. And Flagstaff's, a big part of that fire risk. And, we just had a realtor luncheon where Paul, the chief wildland battalion officer here in town, talked about what a healthy forest was.
He did, and I was actually really surprised at the numbers. He said that for a 1-acre piece of property, 10 to 12 trees is kind of the maximum that you would want on that property to keep it fire safe. And Flagstaff, as you mentioned, with the biggest ponderosa pine forest, is not generally that unpopulated with trees.
Right. I think what one of the big takeaways from Paul's talk with us was that, humans have done so well at preventing wildfires that now we have this huge overgrowth, and the firefighters are challenged with constantly thinning forests and doing controlled burns and trying to create a more natural environment for the forest. And he mentioned that, pre-human times in this area of the country, this forest probably had wildfires every 1 to 3 years, maybe even 3 to 5 years as humans started coming into the area. Now we have fires burning through the forest and creating that rejuvenation of the trees and the land much less often.
Well, because of those trees and because of just natural disasters across the country, insurance companies are unfortunately pulling out of our area. And if they're not pulling out, they're staying and they're raising their prices quite a bit because they have such a deficit to overcome when something does happen that's catastrophic. So knowing that up front and being able to work through that with our clients, set that expectation is really important. And you don't want it to fall out at the end of the transaction right before closing. You want to work through that during the inspection period, as you mentioned initially, that, we want to protect their earnest money. And if you can't get insurance for a rate that you can afford, then it might not be the home for you.
Right. And it's more common now, right, that people come from outside our area. And one of the first things they ask us about our market or a property that sits in the woods is, hey, what's going on with insurance companies in your area? Like, I've been hearing things, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the tone. And we have, not just by choice, which we do want to talk about it, but we have to address it early on because it's top of mind to people. So what I say is it's definitely a conversation that we have to have up front. We want to, talk through that multiple insurance quotes are usually necessary now. You could easily get 1 call, 2 calls, 3 calls into insurance companies that are reputable companies, and they say, you know what, that's a zip code that we don't insure.
Right.
Or you're like, a whole zip code? You realize how much area is in our zip code up here, right? Because we have 3 main zip codes. And you're just going to, peg this neighborhood or this property in with the whole zip code and tell me you can't insure it? This property, in a logical sense, is far less risk, or could be even far more risk than a different property in that zip code. Or they've started breaking down the zip codes into kind of sub areas. And now they're actually using tools like Google Earth and in-person inspections to look at properties and assess risk. We had one recently. I don't want to just name the neighborhood for the sake of stigmatizing that neighborhood, but it was a little bit south of town. You remember that recent one where we had some challenges?
I do. Yeah, it took a few insurance companies to find the right one that might insure it.
Yeah, I think Allstate quoted $10,000, which you're like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
the point? I had an insurance agent say, "Well, I didn't even give your client the quote because it was $18,000 for with a $46,000 deductible."
Oh wow.
I'm like, what? Yeah, that's the first I've heard of that. I'd rather you just say you can't insure it, which is kind of what he said to the client. Now, on that property, we did end up finding an insurance company that was going to be able to insure it, and this was definitely a higher risk property. But that said, what we ended up realizing as we were doing a whole bunch of research was that the insurance company we were going to go with is more particular about their inspection at the property and protects themselves by writing something into the policy that says, hey, we can bind insurance, but once we actually arrive at the property to do the in-person inspection, we have the ability to reject the policy or the property and say, you know what, sorry, unless you do this, this, and this, we're not actually going to move forward with insuring it. And so, you know, these types of things are obviously concerning to our clients because if that 1 in 30 year fire comes in, you know, because on that property, I think the insurance companies were saying it's a 1 in 30 chance that's going to, you know, burn down per year. Now, what if it's that 1 in 30 years, right? And your clients are like, well, I'm just going to self-insure.
Right.
So tell me, you know, we have to kind of, you know, talk about foundation next, but, you know, tell me the challenge with trying to self-insure or if that's even realistic if someone's getting financing on a home.
Well, with financing, it's not realistic, right? They won't allow you to close with that mortgage unless you have like a reputable insurance company with the right limits. And then you think about the cost to build homes now. And so if you're self-insuring, I mean, you really need to have a lot saved up to be able to cover that difference because you probably couldn't build it for the same price that you bought it.
Right. And that's another thing we started talking to clients about a couple of years back is with the increase of prices during COVID, you know, insurance companies in some cases were a little behind on the reality of what the rebuild cost would be. And they're generalizing what does a rebuild cost in Arizona look like? Well, we know our contractors cost more. We have fewer tradespeople, fewer contractors to work with. They can charge a premium. Their costs of doing business up here are higher than if they were in the Phoenix or Tucson areas. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like, for example, I called my insurance company and said, hey, what are you insuring me for? And they said this. And I said, well, can you raise it by 100,000? They go, oh, no, our algorithms are perfect. We know how much it'll cost to rebuild. I go, with respect, like, no, that's not the cost. You know, how much more is it? And it was a couple $100 more. So we upped the coverage and that was great. But yeah, with lending, right, you often have to have a policy just to get the loan. So, you know, that's the first F, right? And we work through these things. And fortunately, up until now, we've never had a client not be able to obtain insurance, even if it's quite the challenge of working through who is the right insurance provider. And of course, there's always those instances where it's fairly easy and the cost of insurance is fine. So it's not on every property. We don't want people to think it's on every property, but that's one of the ways you could kill a deal for sure. So Krystle, what are you seeing? You know, and I definitely see it in more specific neighborhoods the longer we're working in our region with foundations where you start seeing a pattern of foundation issues in certain neighborhoods. So tell me what your experience has been like.
It definitely does seem to be neighborhood area kind of specific for what you noticed today. And maybe some of that's age. You know, obviously some neighborhoods were built before others. And then I think also the soil beneath it. There's a lot of different kinds of soil in our area, and that soil some of it shifts a lot differently than other areas. And so the preparation work of the site underneath is such a huge deal. And it's hard to know, obviously, what was done because you weren't living in the area at the time or you weren't connecting with the builder. So we will notice different things such as the wavy floors and the cracks in the corners of the doorways and things like that. But how do you know if it's really a foundation issue or just kind of general settling, as some inspectors will call it?
Right. And I think people get an idea of the structural soundness of a home based off of the type of foundation, right? When we talk about radon, everybody's like, well, it's on a slab, it's no problem, right? This is only happening in basement homes. It's like, well, there's more to it than that. But, with foundation, I think it's the same thing that our clients and ourselves, right? We all have our own ideas and experiences that make us think, well, if we're on a slab, that is a more sound foundation. Or if it's on a stem wall, yada, yada. And if you talk to a proper custom home builder in town, they're going, well, we did this type of footer and we went this deep and it was like this much extra cost and we moved this dirt and we did this site prep. And it's really eye-opening to understand how important it is, especially, when you're building a costly home, to help, preserve that investment. So I think a large part does come down to certain areas of town are more prone to move just in general. Like there's probably, some type of earth situation where you might have like literally movement.
Yeah.
Earthquakes aren't a huge issue here, even though we've seen a few that get into the threes and so forth. But I don't really think that has anything to do with it. I think it really is mostly the soil and how builders are site prepping. So our soil is, has a lot of clay and it gets wet and expands like crazy. And then a week later, 3 weeks later, right, in our dry region, that clay dries out.
Dries it back up.
It cracks. It creates huge gaps sometimes under homes, right? That expansion and contraction, unless you have post-tension slabs or other measures or baller stem walls and footers, right? Your house is just going to move a little bit. But in certain neighborhoods, we notice a trend, and you could have 100 homes in a certain neighborhood that all have some form of foundation issue.
Correct. The good news, though, is that there are some foundation companies that are pretty good here in Arizona and in northern Arizona that are used to it. They know what to look for, and they can get in and do an inspection. So if you have an inspection period that's a little bit longer, then you can usually get them in to double check things and give you a good idea of what it will take to remedy it and make sure that it's sound.
Right. And it's pretty cool technology, in the remedies of the houses that my clients have bought, where, they can drill a hole in a slab and then with high pressure, foam concrete, they can, fill in a gap, that was created underneath that slab. And, that naturally props up the slab, and they can put, piers into the soil, many feet in, and have that help support different edges of the home that have a little bit more leeway in them and so forth. So it's really interesting once you start digging into the solutions of it, how reasonable the cost can be. In the end, we don't want to have high cost issues that come out of nowhere. We want our clients to understand what things cost, because there's almost always a remedy for when we run into something. And then once we actually get the right expert in place, they'll do a substantially good job to take care of the issue.
So our third F is flood. That ties right in with fire, but it's so important in Flagstaff because we do live on a mountain. All that water gets directed to different areas as it melts from the snow. And just knowing where those areas are and looking that up for our clients before they even go under contract is a really important step. And I don't think all agents think to look for that up front.
Right. So one of the easy steps we can look at is the FEMA flood map. One thing I talk to about when I'm at a property with a client and they say, well, what do you think about this? Wasn't there flooding in the area at some point, right? Or you see evidence of sandbags from preventative measures when we had a flooding issue after, like, say, the fire a few years ago when we had the big burn scar. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, what do you think about this house? I go, well, think about the topography around us, right? Where is water going to flow? Sometimes it's so dang obvious that we're right in the path of the lowest we are the lowest area of anything surrounding us. So then that water comes downhill, it's coming straight towards us. And it's that easy to just logically put it together. And then I think that there's certain areas around town that are pretty unique, but they're just like low-lying areas, right? Fort Valley has a big floodplain that flows through it, and it's probably only a few feet in elevation different where the floodplain is and where most of the homes are built just outside of it. But just knowing kind of our different neighborhoods and the uniqueness about them, we can definitely help our clients understand that. And sometimes it also affects things like what kind of septic are you going to use in that area?
Yeah, flood isn't always covered with your insurance. I think that's something to note, right? Natural disaster flood. And so you kind of have to have that extra rider. It's an extra cost. And there's limits to it as well. So even if you have a FEMA flood policy, I think that the limit is $250,000. That doesn't get you very far if you need to rebuild your home. So just other important things to look at with that, the risk factors there for you as a homeowner. And is it worth it or not?
Yeah, I think the other weird thing is that you have to renew your flood insurance every year.
Yep.
It's not like just a renewing policy until your insurance company is like, hey, we're not renewing you or your rate's going up. I think you actually actively have to renew it from what I've heard.
I believe that's true.
Yeah. When you talk to insurance agents and they go, well, we could do the FEMA plan, but it's only going to cover you to this much. You go, well, that's not going to rebuild half the house, right?
Yeah.
So what's the point? So sometimes the, insurance companies that are designed specifically to cover flood insurance are the best ones to get a separate policy through. And I think what you're saying is, let's debunk this. Flood is not going to be covered by most homeowners insurance policies if you had an issue. Like if your kitchen floods, that's not what we're talking about.
No, but a natural disaster, catastrophic flooding.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've scared people enough for one conversation, but I guess, on the bright side, having the local expert in your camp to help you work through these things is the important takeaway. And we want to be real with people. We want to let them know what they're getting into. We want to help them find the solutions, because when you find that house in the perfect location for your lifestyle that meets your needs, we want to overcome the challenges that might present so that you can feel comfortable buying the right house and be excited to be here in Flagstaff.